most people, they would say, feminism has just been a very pro-woman organization. And the definition that I've started using that I think covers feminism the best, and it's the oldest definition that I can find that feels consistent from the 1800s all the way through to today, is really this idea of trying to make women like men. Trying to give women this idea of life that mimics what we think men's lives are like. So this kind of independence. So breaking away from the family, breaking away from husbands and children, and really separating ourselves from our fertility. And that's really what we're seeing from the early 1900s up until today, is this manipulation of women's emotions to make them angry and bitter and blame, all of their problems on the patriarchy. And this is how, communism has been so successful. And when you take away tradition, when you take away things like the church, when you take away, thousands of years of philosophy and theology, you are left with nothing that will provide equality, liberty, and motherhood. There really is an amazing gift that mothers bring and mothers have, and everybody craves it. Everybody longs for it. We just don't talk about it because it's kind of taboo and it's been made into something very, very bad. But it's basic things like nourishing people or sheltering them, protecting them from things, trying to help them understand who they are, being kind of a mirror for them. This is what women do for other people. And it's an incredibly beautiful gift that we're given.
In deze aflevering van Bloeien in Vrouwelijkheid hebben we een exclusieve interview met Dr. Carrie Gress. Een veelzijdige vrouw die niet alleen moeder is van 5 kinderen en 2 van hen thuisonderwijs geeft, maar ook een doctoraat in filosofie heeft behaald aan de Catholic University of America. Dr. Carrie Gress heeft 10 boeken geschreven, waaronder The End of Woman, en is de drijvende kracht achter de website Theology of Home. In ons gesprek duiken we in de geschiedenis van het feminisme en bespreken we de impact die dit heeft gehad op vrouwen, inclusief de leugen dat het feminisme onvoorwaardelijk goed zou zijn voor vrouwen. Well, thank you again, Dr. Carrie Gress, for making time for us to record this podcast interview with us. It is very special for us because our first episode, we actually made a response video of the interview with you and Lila Rose. And now we have the honor to interview you directly, and we're super excited and eager to learn from you.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's really great to be on with you. It's really fun about Lila.
Yes, yeah. It was a nice episode. I will start directly with the questions. Can you please define feminism and what does it mean to be a feminist?
Great questions. Because feminism really flies under the radar because nobody can really define it. So that I think this is one of our big problems, is we tend to really project what we think feminism is onto something. And I think if you ask most people, they would say, feminism has just been a very pro-woman organization. And they would sort of leave it at that. I obviously have been talking to women about this for a long time, and it's really amazing sort of the array of answers you will get from people, what they think feminism is. But for our purposes, the definition that I've started using that I think covers feminism the best, and it's the oldest definition that I can find that feels consistent from the 1800s all the way through to today, is really this idea of trying to make women like men. Trying to give women this idea of life that mimics what we think men's lives are like. So this kind of independence. Independence is a really key theme in feminism. So breaking away from the family, breaking away from husbands and children, and really separating ourselves from our fertility. So that's the first piece. And then, of course, there's different ways in which that's achieved, and we can go into that later. But that I think that's the best way to really articulate it and see some consistency between, the whole movement. And obviously it's changed over the years as well. So what a feminist is, and I think this is, again, hard to answer because so many people would call themselves feminists, but they don't really know that definition, and they certainly don't know what they've been signing up for, that this is a whole ideology. So, it's very hard to pinpoint, again, what someone is that calls themselves feminist, because all of these different ways in which people think feminism is. But I would say someone who really understands feminism goes along with this idea of trying to make women independent like men and really separate us from our fertility. So maybe I'll just leave it at that, and you can, we can press deeper into all of these issues. But obviously, a real feminist is going to be consistent with what the definition is. But again, we have this whole array of, remarkable different definitions that work around us, and that I think makes our work really challenging.
They often say that a feminist is just someone who stands for equal rights.
That would be great if that's really all that it was, but no, it's a lot more complicated than that, and it has some really deep societal roots and just ways in which it's been co-opted by the Marxists, and again we can get into that, but it's really just not that simple.
Yeah, could you please explain that? Where did feminism actually start? Because we have this tale in our mind about these old sweet ladies that wanted to fight for equal rights for women because women were oppressed and women were not treated right, and that's why feminism started in the first place. And to be against such thing as feminism makes us seem like bad women and ungrateful women for what these women have done for us.
Yeah. No, and I'll start with the last thing that you said first. This idea that we're ungrateful to feminism is such a stranglehold on women. I mean, this is something that I finally had to deal with in my own life. This is why I haven't questioned this, because I've been told I'm supposed to feel grateful for what, the fact that I have a PhD and the fact that I work and, all these kinds of things. How dare I, this? And I've even had people say that to me very, very directly, how dare you come after feminism after all that it's done for you. So I think we have to sort of put that aside for a minute and just realize we wouldn't accept that answer in any other realm of our lives, that we're not allowed to question something, especially if you think about how it relates to something like religion. Nobody would say, oh, you can't question this because how dare you. Everybody thinks that we're free enough thinkers that we can press into something if it seems like there might be problems there. So anyway, so I think that's an important thing to point out, from the very beginning. But feminism really started actually with the ideas of the French Revolution, going back to 1789 and looking into how the French Revolution was really about trying to use the mind to order society. And, of course, it was building off these ideas of Rousseau, liberty, equality, and fraternity. And of course, it ended up being the most unfree, the most non-fraternal, the most unequal revolution to date at that point, because what it was trying to do was take away tradition. And when you take away tradition, when you take away things like the church, when you take away, thousands of years of philosophy and theology, you are left with nothing that will provide equality, liberty, and brotherhood. So that's really what was going on. And I think that Mary Wollstonecraft is one of the first thinkers that really is credited with promoting this idea. And she was very much involved in the French Revolution. She was there for several years. She was friends with Thomas Paine, whom she called Tommy, and she knew where his private residence was in Paris during the French Revolution. So she was very much involved in it. And this was her idea, was how do we sort of map women onto men and make them kind of just all mind, and, we separate them from their fertility. And because this was, Mary Wollstonecraft herself had a very challenging and rough life. And so her idea was, if we can separate women from having to raise children and from husbands that they didn't love, and they could have this idea of free love, they could love whomever, well, wouldn't that create a much better society? And, you can sort of give her a little bit of slack at that stage, because you didn't have hundreds of years of seeing how rotten this has been on people, especially children. But that's really where the idea started. And it certainly kept going deeper and deeper. Her son-in-law, whom she never met because she died in childbirth, giving birth to Mary Godwin, who became Mary Godwin Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. Mary Godwin Shelley married Percy Shelley. And Percy Shelley is this, English poet, romantic poet. And he very much is the one who put together a lot of the three ideas that I think have been the engine behind feminism. In one of his poems, he created this woman named Sithna. And she, the idea was that you would have a woman who would live in a very different kind of society so she could be independent. There was no patriarchy, there were no hierarchies. That was the first piece. The second piece was that she didn't have children. She wasn't married, didn't have children. So she could have this idea of ending monogamy was the second piece. They called it free love back then. And the third piece was the occult. And Sithna had a relationship with the devil, and Percy Shelley himself was very much interested in the occult and very much intrigued by it. He actually spent the night in a coffin trying to connect with the devil. And anyway, so he brought these three pieces together. And I think these three pieces, which I think we can now call, ending the patriarchy, which we still see rampantly in our culture, ending monogamy, the promotion of sexual libertinism, and the occult are all three very, very active in the culture today. So he's the first one, a man no less, that brought all these ideas together, and women just were fascinated by it. And that's really what we see through the 1800s. We see women like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who promoted a lot of Percy Shelley's ideas. And then in the 1900s, this big switch happens where the communists actually saw, and the socialists were already there. They were promoting this initially in the late 1800s, but they saw that if you could really capitalize off the emotions of women and get them angry, they called it this gospel of discontent, that then women would be willing to do whatever they wanted to promote their political ends, the socialist and then later the communist political ends. So then in the 1900s, communism and feminism really were joined at the hip, because they really, the ideas were so similar, get rid of hierarchy and tradition and anything that smacks of patriarchy, open up this idea of free love and sexual libertinism. And then the communists were atheists, but they didn't mind that the feminists were involved in the occult. So it was just sort of this really remarkable kind of wedding of ideas. And that's really what we're seeing from the early 1900s up until today, is this manipulation of women's emotions to make them angry and bitter and blame, all of their problems on the patriarchy. And this is how, communism has been so successful in around the world, really, but certainly in the United States and Europe in these ideas. But this is also why feminism is still around and, thriving, because these ideas have just taken off and been, used against us in so many different ways. And we can certainly go into the second wave of feminism and see the underbelly of that. But all of it has really been built on some awful ideas. And I think very few people know this. And so this is why there's so much confusion about what feminism is.
Yeah, how come that this is not well known about feminism? Because if you even search this about feminism, you cannot easily find it.
No, yeah. Well, part of it is because, and this has been really interesting. Part of it is because feminism silences men. Men don't want to talk about this. In fact, I've had so many men reach out to me who are doing research on this, and they know they can't publish it, that no publisher would ever publish a man talking about this topic, at least previously. So they're sending it to me, hoping that I can actually get the word out. But, it wasn't easy at all for me to find this data. I had to really do some very deep dives. I had to piece together all kinds of documents, certainly from the communists throughout the 1900s. And I think part of it is because feminism is so powerful, and it's such the common narrative that nobody really wants to fight this. I think even conservatives in the United States don't want to fight this. And so they have most women who would not consider themselves socialists or Marxists or communists have really just decided, well, we'll look at first wave feminism and try to make that a good thing. And that's, I think, really, why it hasn't had a lot of scrutiny. And that was something that I believed. I thought I would look back to this first wave of feminism and not find anything. And as soon as I started tugging on some of the details, in fact, I was in reading Mary Wollstonecraft. I have written, my dissertation was on human rights. And of course, that there's so much that happens during that period of the French Revolution that as I was reading her, I thought something is not right here. There's some real pieces here that are problematic. And so it's just a matter of, once you start uncovering the details. And that was actually the amazing thing, is there was no books that I used that were sympathetic to my argument. They were all written by people that were trying to still promote feminism. So it
Yeah.
was really interesting to, start seeing how the bad ideas really start coming out when you start looking a little bit more deeply. Now, gratefully, there's a woman named Janice Fiamengo who's Canadian who has done some work on this. I wasn't familiar with her work before, but I'm learning a lot about people that I didn't study that she studied.
Yeah.
So there are a few other smaller voices, but yeah, for the most part, everybody has just really bought into this narrative that either the first wave or it was the first wave was good or parts of the second wave or trying to gloss over it and make it something good, because it's very hard to fight the whole
Yeah.
world on this topic. It's obviously not an easy thing to do, and especially when feminism hasn't been well defined and everybody thinks it's such a good thing.
Yeah, I also believe that people are afraid to go against such thing as feminism because it connects the thought for people that women have rights. Women because of feminism are being treated right and not abused. So how dare you question it? And you're like shamed into not wanting to be curious and question it because it is taught to us as such a good and positive thing for us women.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. And what I didn't mention is just that looking back, if we look back at the 1800s and the 1700s and before, um, you know, we're talking about an era when people didn't shower. They showered like once a year. I mean, there's so many things that are so different than our own culture, that it's really hard to even look back at it and say, everyone was mistreated, everybody was abused, people are starving. I mean, there's so many. This is pre-industrial revolution. This is very challenging times for everybody. And so what's interesting is just to even look at, period like Mary Wollstonecraft's period in England, where you've got, the Anglican, the revolution had already happened, where the Anglicanism had been adopted, and so the church is waning. You've got land, people, the gentry and the elite classes are all about having land, and women end up becoming really, in a lot of respects, you can see it in the literature, something like Heinrich Ibsen's, The Doll's House, where woman really does become sort of a property and a plaything. And that's just not, the way most women experience life, because of the fact that you had a household, you had people, a husband and wife working together, whether it was on the farm or working in town. They weren't so separated. And I think that that's something that we miss too, because the Industrial Revolution has really changed the dynamic of our lives. But when you have a husband and wife who are working for something, and they can see actually their children as an asset, because they are there to help them, and not only help them when they're young, but also when they're older. It's those kinds of bigger picture things, and we just sort of look at like, how were women treated, and then that's the automatic reaction is that they had awful lives. Well, yeah, many had awful lives. But again, it's a lot of it is because of financial issues. And whenever you've got a rise in the middle class, it's going to change a lot of dynamics. So in any event, I think it's just important to be mindful of just these dramatic shifts that have taken place because of our economic wealth. And, the kind of, we almost have a sense that we're free as women because the wealth that we have. But, as soon as there's a natural disaster or something, it's usually the men that come to our rescue,
Yeah.
or for that matter. So in any event, I think it's just really important to be mindful of the historical context that a lot of this came out of as well.
Yeah, because one of the things we hear often is that women couldn't have their own bank accounts. What was the reason for that?
Or property before the
Or
bank
property,
accounts.
right?
Yeah.
Right. So it's really interesting, because if you look at that, I mean, it just made sense. It was a family unit, and that was, kind of the same thing with a vote. When the couple decides how the husband's going to vote, the husband's also the one that has to go to war too. So, but if you see them as a unit, and I don't have a real position about, I don't think we need to repeal the vote or anything like that. I'm not, suggesting that, but I think that there's a way to look at things more holistically. The other reality is that the husband is actually legally responsible for his wife. At one point, Margaret Sanger is actually arrested for some of the things that she was doing in the United States that was against the law. and it was her husband who had to go to jail for her activities. It's really wild, and I think we don't realize that either, that he's responsible for anything that she does. She's not going to jail. He's the one that's going to jail. So anyway, I think this is also another one of those situations where if we look carefully at the context and we look at kind of this organic understanding of the family and, just what everybody's bringing to it in the way that people saw themselves as a unit instead of just as individuals, then things make a lot more sense and don't look, like it was such an awful reality. There were, elements that went both ways in terms of just the couple working together. And, bad things could happen either way if either one was, wreaking havoc on society or in their family.
What I also heard you saying during an interview, I think, with Pins with Aquinas, and that really made me think, like, no feminist speaks about this, that one of the feminists got mad that black men were allowed to vote before women were allowed to vote, and that sparked the rage in them. Could you please tell more about that?
Yeah, no, this is a really interesting period in feminism because this was Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and she's considered the grandmother of feminism. In fact, she even went so far as to like retell the narrative of how feminism came about in the suffrage movement, which included Susan B. Anthony. But she and Susan B. Anthony didn't know each other until much later. So she was kind of this master of trying to craft this vision that she and Susan B. Anthony were the first ones, and this was really the story that she told. But she was absolutely certainly racist, and she was very upset that Black men and Italian men and Asian men were able to, and Native American men were able to vote before she was, or before her friends were able to vote. And she very much had that issue. And actually, the amazing thing is that it created a split in the feminist movement, and so she had an organization, a suffragist organization that then split off, and another one was created, and they were the ones that were not racist. They were the ones that said, we just want to be for women's suffrage. We're not racist. Anyway, the two of them end up clashing. These two groups end up clashing so significantly that the suffrage movement was put back. The vote was delayed for like 20 years because of all the infighting between these women. And there was huge scandals connected with it. And anyway, some of this is in the book, but it was just really amazing to see, and how much coverage that gets. The fact that this is the very first feminist was a complete racist, doesn't seem to have made it into the literature very often.
No. If I hear you speaking, so I listen to a lot of interviews, and when I hear that, I'm like, whoa, this could be such a good movie. It's like so much drama. Like, why do they make Outlander? Why do they make Game of Thrones if they can make a movie about the feminists? Because their stories are so dramatic and interesting. And if many women, especially I think Christians, would know this, they would not link themselves as feminists, because it's like an oxymoron to be like a Christian feminist, even though it's being taught to us that it's normal and it's good for Christians to be pro-women, like immediately saying that you're not pro-women if you're not a feminist.
Right. Isn't that the funny thing? And I think that's what the left has been so good at doing, is just making us think you have to be one or the other. You're either pro-woman or you're not pro-woman, even if you're a woman, and somehow this really awful, it's awful that you can call yourself a woman if you're not pro-woman. So these kind of binaries, I think, have been really unhelpful. And even the Handmaid's Tale here in the United States has become a big icon of either you're a feminist or you're that's what's going to happen is the Handmaid's Tale. And
we get these comments a lot that people are commenting under our post, like praise be, and making the link that we're so.
Oh, that's amazing. That's hysterical. Yeah, no, it's really remarkable. But I think, the thing that's really, truly amazes me is the fact that Christianity and feminism are so incompatible. And I think that's what's been hidden for so long. And it's just been great to really start giving women the capacity to be able to see just how it's like two, the same sides of a magnet. There's just no way to really make them connect. And it's not until recently, you know, I've been talking about these three ideas that have animated feminism, the three elements that are used to get the feminist ideology into the culture. Again, that idea of destroying the patriarchy, the occult, and liberating, you know, sexual liberation. And it wasn't until really recently, it was actually my husband was helping me with a talk, and he was trying to help me figure out how do I make this a better model for people to understand. And he said, you know, actually you could compare it with it as you could make it an anti-trinitarian idea, because the first idea of smashing the patriarchy, who's that going after? It's going after God the Father.
Exactly.
The second idea of the occult, who's that going after? It's going after the authority of Christ. And the third one, the body is, what's the body? It's the temple of the Holy Spirit. And so that's what's trying to be destroyed. The three together actually are, you know, fundamentally so opposed to Christianity.
So smashing the patriarchy, free love, and the occult, right?
You smash the patriarchy, free love, and the occult. Exactly. It's a very anti-Trinitarian message. And you know, it was so great when he said that, because I finally realized, because I've been asking, like, why is it always these three? It's all, you know, there's this pattern throughout history. It's always these three. Now I know why. You know, it's absolutely just this diabolical effort to really confuse women and, you know, use their own emotions against them, and even lead them to a place where they are not working in accord with their own human nature. And I think that's the saddest part. And what the real fruit that we're seeing is just the incredible amount of unhappy women. You know, that feminism has led us to this place where none of the metrics show women are happier because of feminism. And in fact, you know, it's mainly women are just more medicated. That's what's actually happened. Certainly not happier.
What was it about the first feminist? Because I remember you saying that you found out that they saw Lucifer as the one who set them free, actually. So in essence, they are anti-Christian because they see Lucifer as their liberator. Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is actually a hugely important and really interesting piece, and super relevant for today. And I'll explain how in a minute. But you know, when you're trying to change a culture, you have to go back to the very, very beginning. And this is what Percy Shelley did. He went back all the way back to Genesis 3, that temptation of Adam and Eve in the garden. And he reinterpreted it. Actually, he used kind of the ideas of Milton in Paradise Lost. But he wanted to change Eve from, you know, someone who was defeated to making her into a heroine. And so he said, well, the real story is that Eve actually really did get this kind of unique wisdom from the serpent. She actually has this kind of capacity to know truth and wisdom and knowledge and, you know, all of that she got from the serpent, which, you know, is fascinating, because what it does is it basically turns the order of creation that God established, where it's God the Father, then the man is created, then Eve is created. And just as an aside, there's this really beautiful book I've been reading recently, written by a woman named Nina Hermann. She's a professor. She's from Germany, but she's a professor in San Francisco at St. Patrick's Seminary. And she talks about the language used of Eve being created from the rib of Adam and as helpmate. It's not just like she's a maid or she's a helper or she's, you know, auxiliary. The language, the word that's actually used is much more significant, and it's something like the kind of help that only God can give, which I think is just so much more of a beautiful articulation under, you know, much deeper understanding of who Eve was. So in any event, God the Father, then it's Adam, Eve is created, and then they have dominion over the animals. Well, what happens when you change Genesis 3? It just completely inverts the order. So you suddenly have the serpent is dictating to Eve a kind of wisdom, and then she's dictating to Adam, and then God is just nowhere really in the picture. So it's just this complete inversion of that. Now Shelley was the one that came up with this, but it's ends up being, you know, dotting all the work of the feminists in the early and in the first wave. Again, Elizabeth Cady Stanton used this idea. She actually had this book that she edited with some other women called The Women's Bible. Excuse me. And in this Bible, it's basically sort of like an adolescent rant against the Bible. And anywhere a woman is mentioned, they're very quick to point out how she ought to be treated or how awful it is. And it's really juvenile, but and you can still buy it today, of course. But it's no secret that Elizabeth Cady Stanton was very anti-Christian. And she was part of a league of anti-Christians and very much trying to get rid of that so that she could promote this idea again of Genesis 3 and the woman really having this kind of wisdom that needed to be promoted. So even last year, no, it was earlier this year, Amazon had this series called like the Has Been Hotel or something like that. It was something, has something. I think it was Has Been Hotel. And you can go on Amazon and watch the trailer for this. And it's what it is exactly this description I just gave you of this reordering of Genesis 3, using the character of Lilith and the devil. And anyway, it was just like eye-popping to see this when it came out, because this is what I've been talking about for 8 years or 6 years, and suddenly there it is. Amazon has not only just created it's an anime, it's a cartoon kind of version of this, but it's it's just to the letter exactly this kind of whole occult vision of how it is that women were created, and why it is that women have this special kind of knowledge, and all the things that really lead into witchcraft and the pagan rituals and whatnot that are being promoted today.
Yeah, it does make sense now that they try to hide that in the beginning, but now it's coming more to the light that it has to do with witchcraft and with other spiritualities. And because first you could not get the Christians along if you would openly say that, but now like people are proud to be Luciferians and be proud to be anti-Christians, and yeah, it really makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think it's all coming out, all of those elements, just to see how people are not afraid of it. I mean, that's really kind of the amazing thing, is just how mainstream it's become. So yeah, making obviously our work to help people understand what it is they're really getting involved in so much more vital, because they make these things appear to be very innocuous. And yet there's nothing innocuous about, diabolical possession. This is a real thing that, people suffer from incredibly on so many levels, and the people around them too. So, yeah, these are not things to be played with or toyed with, for sure.
Yeah. Because the first feminist, if I remember it correctly, they did all these outrageous things that supposedly women could not freely do, but no one was like stopping them from it. So how were women actually oppressed? What were they actually like fighting for women to be free from, if they could go along and have sex out of wedlock and like scam, write books and scam people? Like what was their point?
Yeah. No, actually, and this is a really great question, because, and I've done a lot more research in this last year. This isn't in the book because I just wasn't really aware of it. One of the things that Mary Wollstonecraft talks about in the 1790s, and then again you can see it in this woman named Emma Goldman in the 1910s. So there's these two women are like 100 years apart, at least, well over that. But the idea was really that women didn't know what they could be without family and children. We had never seen it. We never experienced it. And Emma Goldman, who was an anarchist, she was originally from Russia, I believe, and finally emigrated to the United States. This was her whole point. And Mary Wollstonecraft says the same thing. We don't really know what women could do because they've been just busy doing all this banal stuff that's not really what they are about. So we have no idea. And this is, Emma Goldman makes the exact same point of we don't know what women have the capacity to do. And so they also saw it, Goldman in particular, and many of the suffragists. You have to remember that Elizabeth Cady Stanton and others are writing around the same time of the abolitionist movement. So they actually saw the family as a kind of slavery. They're, very direct comparison to, we need to free women from the family the way that we've freed slaves from slave masters. This is how they were viewing men, and kind of the language that they were using in different ways. And again, not understanding that the family is the basic cell of civilization. And when you destroy the family, you destroy the whole culture. and end up creating tyranny because of the power vacuum. Anyway, like they didn't understand any of this. They just thought that there was going to be some sort of new bloom and blossom that would come from women that couldn't happen before because they were busy having children. So that was kind of the view then. And of course, that you can see how easily that was co-opted by the Marxists who
Yeah,
really
of
just want
course.
women to work. You
Yeah.
know, we'll take care of your kids, you work, and you're going to be happy. You know, that was really the idea.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think it's super interesting to see all this context and really realize what it is that they thought that was going to happen. There is a book that I read by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, I think is her name. That is, I don't know if you've seen the movie Wonder Woman, or if you ever saw there was a TV series back in the day when I was growing up. I was a huge Wonder Woman fan when it was a TV series, and then I recently just watched the movie with Gal Gadot, but it's amazing because this woman, Charlotte Perkins Gilman, actually wrote a story called Herland. And it's all about these women who they somehow are miraculously able to reproduce without men. And they end up having this super advanced culture. And, you know, they're all very peaceful and very nice, and they get along so well. And they're, you know, it's just, and this is really what Wonder Woman was based on this book. And it was these two men that end up sort of stumbling upon this island, or it wasn't an island, it was a peninsula or something, I don't remember, but and they end up living there, and for several years they're sort of trapped there, but they're just amazed at how advanced society is. And I think this was really the vision that they thought was, if we get men out of power, and you see this again with someone like Kate Millett, who's writing again and much later in the second wave in the 70s, 1960s and 70s. But the idea was that if we can get men out of control, you know, if they're the ones that are not calling the shots on government and politics, then suddenly we're going to have this kind of nirvana. You know, everybody's going to, you know, culture can advance. We're not going to have all these wars, and we're really going to just see what.
I think we will have more wars with women in control.
No, we don't talk to each other.
Exactly. And that was why it was so funny that this woman is writing at this time when, you know, all these suffrage movements are like at each other's throats, and, you know, they're just sort of imploding because of all of this, you know, the gossip and the slandering and all of that.
I think maybe that's why we cannot even define feminism, because there are so many groups within feminism that don't line up with each other.
Yeah, exactly. Let's keep splintering because we can't get along with the others. So, yeah.
So some critics might argue, because of feminism, we have the freedom to hold this podcast or write books like yours. How would you address this sentiment in the context of the broader feminist movement?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I would challenge that, because I think so many the things that were happening because of the Industrial Revolution. One of the reasons why women could go to school is that suddenly their parents or their families had the money to send them to school, and schools were like, we'll take your money, you know, we're going to start educating women, because not only could the first son be now educated, but they had the means to educate daughters. So those things are already happening in terms of just the expansion of opportunities for women. And a lot of that is just so economic. So that's a first economic piece, is connected to schools. The other piece that's huge that doesn't get talked about enough is just all of the technology that has created opportunities for women to be able to do what they do. So, for example, I have 5 children. If I lived 100 years ago, I'm sure I would spend most of my day washing their clothes and preparing you know, we would probably have a kitchen, like a homestead kind of kitchen or kitchen garden. And I would be tending the garden. I would be making sure we had things canned and ready for the winter, you know, all of those kinds of things. There was no grocery stores back then. So these kinds of elements change significantly as well. Now, when I need the laundry done, you know, I fill the laundry, my sons change it for me, and then various people are involved in folding and putting it away. This is what, you know, it happens just throughout the day. It's not.
Thanks to men again, like they did all the technology for us.
Yes, men are the ones that made all this technology for us.
They liberated us again.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that is you know, just these are really vital pieces to look at and really recognize that feminism hasn't been this heroine that everybody makes it out to be, but there, you know, all these other elements are going on. The other reality too is just at what cost do we have these things? Because especially when you look at abortion numbers in 2023, there were 44 million abortions worldwide. 44 million. That's bigger than the population of, I think Poland is 44 million, Canada's 39 million. Like that's imagine a whole country being wiped out by like an asteroid or something, or a bomb. This is a huge number. And not only does that affect, obviously, the children that are aborted, but it affects the mothers who had those abortions. It affects the fathers that were involved in one way or another. There's a real emotional and spiritual damage that happens there. And I think this is another piece that gets really swept under the carpet, is just that emotional brokenness that happens from that. I know there's a woman named Vicki Thorne who founded this organization called Project Rachel here in the United States to help women recovering from abortion. And she talked a lot about how, most women wouldn't even start to grieve if they say they had an abortion as a teenager. She said they wouldn't start grieving until they were 26, until the brain was fully formed and they could really understand what it is and was that they had done. And she saw a huge spike in young women who were grieving and going through Project Rachel at that age, because prior to that, the brain is just not fully mature yet. So anyway, I think that there have been huge ramifications. I think even looking at, look at Europe and the United States right now. Why do we have this immigration problem? Because we haven't been having enough children. We have these huge government programs that have to be paid for, and they're not paid for when you don't have enough people at the bottom to pay for them, enough workers. So that's another place in which we've been caught, and we've got these birth dearths from which almost no civilization has been able to recover. So anyway, I think it has come at a great cost in terms of what it is. And even just the damage done generationally. Was a new report done out this week about young women in the United States, who most of them have no faith. Well, you have the second or third generation of a girl who hasn't been raised in a family with a mother and father, never seen a family, an intact, healthy family. It's going to be very hard for her to have faith, because the parents really have to be an icon, especially the father, a real icon of what God the Father is. So if you don't see good men around you, then it's very hard to imagine a good God who actually loves you and cares for you. So I think that for all the feminism claims to have done good, to bring good about for women, there has been much more significant bad that has happened that we're just not paying attention to and not seeing it properly, because it feels like we're treading on into that sacrosanct, like, how dare you question feminism realm. And so it just doesn't get talked about, or it gets blamed on more superficial reasons instead of the fundamental one, which is really telling women that they're going to be happier if they're independent and they are focused on their work instead of the bigger issue of family and husband. I'm not saying the women shouldn't work. I just think that we need to prioritize the family over work. And I think men need to do the same thing. Work is not meant to be the goal and end point of our lives. We're made for something much richer. And, we see that in terms of women need to mother something. In the United States, Americans spend $700 million on pets, costumes for Halloween. Costume for their pets for Halloween. $700 million. And I've been watching every year this number goes up. A couple of years ago, it was only $500 million.
Yeah, I can really imagine that, because that's one of the first episodes I said that feminism even sneaked into my Christian faith without even realizing it. That even if I was married young, but I still had this idea, no, career first, no children, I want to enjoy life. And that's why I waited until I am 27 to have my first child. And what replaced that feeling of wanting to be a mother was my pet. Even though I really loved my pet, I really think that taking her kind of filled that void of my hormones wanting to mother something. So that's also, I think, so important to make women aware of that hey, start having children young, because we still have a biological clock that's ticking. And it's interesting that you pointed that out.
Yeah. And in the United States, we're seeing like children's um like mega stores that were for kids. There was one called Toys R Us that has, I think it went bankrupt, and now I think they're coming back in a limited version. But these Toys R Us stores used to be in every town. You could find one. Now they're not there. They're now, but the PetSmart's everywhere. So you're seeing, schools close, but dog parks are popping up all over. And there are actually more pets than children in homes now. I think it just flipped where it's now more pets than children. So it really has become a surrogate, and it's exactly as you said. If you help women be made aware that this is really something that is on a human nature level. I mean, this is why you're pouring all your emotions into a pet. I think it helps a lot to really understand just the ways in which we are truly being manipulated. And the other trend that we're seeing a lot in the US, I'm sure you guys are seeing this in Europe, is the a ton of negativity directed at small children in particular. I think there was actually well, in any event, it's just incredible to see, like on Instagram, where a mother will be treating her toddler badly, and somehow she thinks that she looks good, being a jerk to her child. So this has really become more fashionable as well, and it's obviously young women who are immature and need to mature. And this is one of the great things that motherhood does, because it takes us out of ourselves and makes us have to respond to the needs of others. It diminishes our narcissism. But if people don't know that that's what it's supposed to do, and this is a feature, not a flaw, that motherhood is hard, then they're not going to be able to figure that out, and really will start pressing into all this negativity towards children.
We both make the case that feminism has led to a decline in happiness among women. Can you share some of the evidence or reasoning behind this claim, and how you think women can regain fulfillment without feminism?
Yeah. So just on a mental health level, I mean, we've talked about this already a little bit. There's a woman named Hannah Speer, who's in Switzerland, actually, who's been doing a lot of research on this. She's a psychiatrist, and she's points out that there are like three main stages in a woman's life where mental health crises happen. And I don't know her work that well. I've actually just become familiar with her, but she seems really amazing, the work that she's been doing. And much of it was based on her own life experience too, but also listening to clients over and over again and really realizing that there are these choke points in a woman's life where what she wants to do and what the culture is telling her to do, what she wants to do based on her human nature, it's all being thwarted, and it's all being pushed in a direction in which isn't compatible with who we are as women. So again, like the pets, or even when you see older women, and I have a lot of experience with older women who are telling me, stories about how they never thought that they would end up being alone when they're 50, 60, 70 years old, because they expected they would have a family, they would have people around them, but because of what the feminism has pushed on them, they find themselves incredibly alone. So anyway, this is, I think, the fundamental underlying issue is that there's an incompatibility with our human nature and what feminism is telling us to do. Feminism tells us to be independent, and just have friends, but that doesn't pan out when you've lost your job, or when you're sick, or all of those kinds of things. And we also know that women are much more vulnerable when they're alone, to just about anything. And there's got to be an incredible amount of fear about that as well. So anyway, I think that's the fundamental reason behind it. But yeah, it's also just this bigger picture, like what feminism purports to be giving women is not really what women don't think through it trajectorily long enough to really realize, like, okay, if I do this and I focus on my career in my 20s, 30s, and 40s, then I will be alone. In my 50s, 60s, and 70s. And, there's obviously efforts to sort of glamorize that. But even someone like Barbara Walters, who, is such a huge journalist in the United States, she talked about how she wished she had had more children. Because people don't look, at the end of their lives, they don't look back and say, I wish I had worked more. I wish I had spend more time in the office. It's really it's about relationships. And this is, especially for women, we want thick, meaningful relationships. And, there's no better way to have that than to have a husband, to have children, and, to go through a lot of things together. This is how you're really bonded with your husband and his family and your family and
Yeah.
your own children that you have together. So all of those things I think are being missed, but that's really what is fundamentally driving the fact that women are more depressed. And then you also have just even factors like the birth control pill has a lot of negative effects biologically. I mean, huge effects. Even the people that are pro birth control pill or pro birth control in general recognize the damage that the pill is doing, and that it was never meant to be a long-term solution. It was only meant to be, used for a year or two, sort of as a stopgap. And it has huge ramifications. The abortion itself, there's huge data, especially from China, where there was no stigma against it. There's a lot of data connecting breast cancer with abortion, because abortion is ending the pregnancy process at a point when the breast is still developing and hasn't effectively made the milk ducts develop properly. And so there's connection with that and breast cancer, because it's a very easy stage for breast cancer to develop, because it's not a natural end to the pregnancy the way it is when the hormones are ending a pregnancy and a miscarriage. So anyway, you can sort of look at anything connected to women's health, and it will go back at one stage or another to the things that we're doing to thwart pregnancy, or the social things that we're doing to tell women, that they don't need families.
If a young woman were listening to this interview and considering whether or not to embrace feminist ideology, what would you say to her? How would you encourage her to think differently about her role in society and her identity as a woman?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And one of those things I wish someone had told me when I was younger. First of all, those of us who have lived through it and are living through it are detoxing from it. If something is objectively and authentically good for you, you don't have to detox from it.
Yes.
Um, and this is actually the really encouraging thing, is I'm seeing a lot of young women who are rejecting feminism outright. They just don't see any use for it. So it feels like there are fewer women younger who are embracing it, but of course there's plenty who still are. But yeah, I would say run from from it. Find, um, read my book. Yeah, read my book and find people that other people that are on the internet, or Janice Fiamengo's great work online, on YouTube. Find people who are talking about this and just educate yourself to what it is actually happening in the ways in which we're being manipulated. I think the other thing I would really suggest to young women is precisely to see how your emotions are being played in so many different levels, because we're in a post-rational culture, and so we have to use emotions to convince people of things, which um, can be both good and bad depending on who's doing the manipulating. But I'm obviously, I have a PhD in philosophy, and I think there's something really important about being able to reason through things and see what's behind it, and understanding history and all of that. So, yeah, so I think it's just really important for women to educate themselves. I think the other thing is, we've been groomed for 50 years to be afraid of pregnancy, to be afraid of family, to be afraid of the word motherhood.
Yeah.
Uh, and this is why women can't define what womanhood, or men and women really can't define what womanhood is, because we've tried to separate it so deeply from motherhood. But motherhood isn't something, it doesn't just mean biologically having children. It's a general attitude that I think all women need to have towards everyone in their lives. And it can serve them on a spiritual level. It can be a kind of mentoring. It can be, with your colleagues at work. It's a genuine concern about other people's lives. And if we started reminding women of that when they're children, when it comes very naturally to them, and stop stomping that out of them, it would obviously, I think it could change things overnight in terms of just the way we work there, our colleagues are, the way our families are, instead of feeling like this is some sort of scourge, or what Gloria Steinem called, codependency, or even that idea of the devouring mother. There really is an amazing gift that mothers bring and mothers have, and everybody craves it. Everybody longs for it. We just don't talk about it because it's kind of taboo, and it's been made into something very, very bad. But it's basic things like nourishing people, or sheltering them, protecting them from things, trying to help them understand who they are, being a kind of a mirror for them. This is what women do for other people. And it's an incredibly beautiful gift that we're given. And instead, it's really been twisted and made into, this, again, the idea of the devouring mother, or, um, the bitchy woman at work or whatever. So I think that was something I would really encourage young women to do, is start looking for ways in which they can be kind and generous and sort of be a balm for people. And even looking at the human trafficking situation, it's such a crisis in the world that we've got. Again, I think it's the roots of it go back to the sexual revolution and to feminism more broadly. And that's a whole other discussion. But the only people that the trafficked humans trust are religious nuns. And so every year, religious sisters get together in Rome and talk about how they can start helping these sex slaves, basically. And it's because there's something beautifully, spiritually rich and beautiful that these women have that these people obviously need. And that's why they trust them. They know they're not going to be, further abused and mistreated by them. They're going to actually be able to start healing. So imagine if we had that mindset as women in the culture again. Just, the way the culture could be transformed, instead of being dark and ugly, it can be really a place of healing and growth and enrichment and inspiration for men to actually want to be men again too. I think this is a miss piece, is that when women behave badly, it doesn't inspire men to be better men, and the two go hand in hand.
But thank you so much for your time, for the wisdom that you have shared with us. We will link your book down below, so women who are watching this and men can really dive in deeper into this subject, because in your book, The End of Woman, you dive deeper into the details and people can learn more about this topic. And like you also said at the end, it's very important that women educate themselves on this matter to really know the truth about feminism, and to see what fruits it has brought into our lives if we hold that mirror in front of us. And it might shock many women, especially also me, when I found out that I got so many feminist traits and thoughts and ideologies just sneaking into me, even through the Christian faith that I had. But women like you really helped me to open my eyes and see the truth of it, and wanting to warn other women about this. And this is also why we have our podcast, to inspire and encourage women to bloom in their God-given femininity, and also expose the darkness of the dangers of feminism.
That is great. Well, thanks so much for having me. It's really been a delight to meet both of you.
Bedankt voor het luisteren naar deze aflevering van Bloeien in Vrouwelijkheid. We hopen dat je net zo geïnspireerd bent geraakt door het gesprek met Dr. Carrie Gress als wij. Als je meer wil leren over de thema's die we vandaag hebben besproken, zoals de geschiedenis van het feminisme en de impact ervan op vrouwen, raden we je van harte aan om haar nieuwste boek The End of Woman te lezen. In dit boek gaat Dr. Carrie Gress dieper in op de oorsprong van het feminisme, de schadelijke gevolgen ervan, en biedt ze een frisse kijk op wat het werkelijk betekent om als vrouw te bloeien. Je vindt The End of Woman op Amazon. We hebben een link in onze omschrijving toegevoegd. Bedankt voor het kijken en tot de volgende aflevering.